and thank you to all of you for having me talk to you, Bill and Thomas. Thank you for the introduction and the recommendation. It's my pleasure to speak about the biggest concern that I have for our city and our country, our state today, and of course is homelessness. It's something that probably doesn't escape any of you. I assume you're all Southern California mostly. Southern California problem has escalated dramatically and is a major social problem, as you know. But I grew up in the Midwest with the good Midwestern values, both Illinois and Missouri. When I was a boy, we really didn't know about homeless. We didn't see homeless people. The closest thing that we came to it was occasionally a hobo would come to the back door and beg for a sandwich, which my father or mother would be happy to provide them. And that was it. And they weren't really considered homeless. They were considered wanderers. They just moved about the country to have the freedom of the open road lifestyle. And in some movies, it was even gratified and glorified. But today, it's a different story. As I grew older, I moved up the corporate ladder, and I ended up in Chicago in 1980. Homeless were few and far between. One notable homeless lady in Chicago was known as the Bag Lady. And she was known as the Bag Lady because she was gifted artistically, and she would make these beautiful scenes on grocery bags. And they would be on street scenes, skylines, things about Chicago that were beautiful. Well, a friend of mine was a gallery owner, and he specialized in untrained artists, those that hadn't gone to school to be an artist. And he bought her collection, or he put her collection up for an opening on consignment. Well, the collection sold out, and she made lots of money. He made a few bucks too. And the money was given to her and her daughter, who was trying to get her off the streets, and they put her in a hotel. And that hotel stay lasted 2 weeks, and she left. She wanted to be back on the street. She went back on the street. So it kind of shaped my thinking a little bit that these people really wanted to be on the street. They wanted to be wanderers, to have the freedom of the open environment and the open sky. And I didn't really think too much more about it until I moved to Los Angeles. When I bought a company in LA. I moved here in 1991. And during my early years in Los Angeles, I made it through downtown and went to the wholesale districts and to check out the opportunities to get values on various items. And inevitably, passed through Skid Row. I was shocked, absolutely dumbfounded by the level of poverty and the amount of people that were on Skid Row 30 years ago. We're not speaking about today, but 30 years ago. I had not seen that anywhere in this country. And as a businessman, I had traveled virtually to every major city in this country many times. So I thought, how could this happen in the US? I've traveled the world, and I've seen South Africa, the huge amounts of homeless people living in shanties, and favelas in Brazil, and poverty in Egypt, and different countries around the world that had extreme poverty and homelessness. How could this happen in America? I did not understand it, and I did not think it was something that I could just turn my head to and say, well, they're just downtown, they're just in Skid Row. And of course, today, none of us can say that because they're in our backyards. They're everywhere, they're ubiquitous. So I turned to my staff at the time and I said, let's, as a company and as employees of a company, get involved in doing something to work with the homeless. And of course, the first thing that came to mind was feeding food. So I said, try to find some organization that feeds the homeless. Well, my director of administration found an organization called Life. So I don't recall if any of you have heard of it. It stands for Love is Feeding Everyone. It was founded by Dennis Weaver, Chester, if you remember Chester and Gunsmoke, and Valerie Harper. I'm sure y'all remember Valerie Harper. Two very big-hearted people from the world of Hollywood, which doesn't often have that. And they had formed Life with the idea of taking foods that were no longer saleable, a can that was dented, a bread that was day old, and bring it into a central location for distribution to the feeding agencies. Well, that was an undertaking that produced about $7 million worth of food a year that was distributed to 230 agencies in Southern California. So for years, they did that. We got involved, and I said, I'll serve on the board and we'll do some fundraising. And we did. We did fundraising events, golf tournaments, kind of my passion anyway, but golf tournaments can raise a good amount of money. And we had golf tournaments, we had dinners, and we successfully raised a lot of money to keep the organization afloat. Dennis Weaver was retiring, and when he did so, he moved to Colorado and wanted to leave the organization and asked if I would become chair, which I did, and served in that capacity for several years. And I looked upon my vendors in my company to provide, help provide the support. And if you want to be my vendor, you want to take a certain percentage of your sales and contribute it to this organization, which was a little bit of a strong arm approach, but it did work to help them find their own generosity. And it worked out well. It really provided support for many years. But then as time evolves and opportunities evolve, I sold my company. And when I sold my company, I no longer had this generous amount of vendor support coming in, which takes a lot of money to run an organization with employees. And when I did that, it became evident that soon I would need to do something differently with nonprofits. So we merged with the LA Food Bank, which was a natural. LA Food Bank had a little bit different model, but still did basically the same thing, distributing food to agencies that had supplied the homeless throughout Southern California. So that ended well. And at that point, I was somewhat out of the homeless business. I had two young boys that were graduating into the age of scouts and got very involved in scouting in Los Angeles and still am. And became a scoutmaster and worked with them and many other boys to become Eagle Scouts. The troop that I formed in 1998 has produced about 96 Eagle Scouts to this point, which is pretty much a record, I think. I don't know that it's measured, but it's kind of a record. The past few years, I noticed the increase in homelessness throughout the city, in the neighborhoods, in my own neighborhood in West LA. And I started attending the West Side Neighborhood Council, You all may be familiar with neighborhood councils. Neighborhood councils there's about 100 of them, actually 99, and they're subdivisions of the city council. Now, they do not have authority to make decisions on behalf of the city, but they have recommendation powers. So if a developer wants to develop something in a particular part of the city, they have to go to the neighborhood council, get their blessings. Doesn't mean if they don't get their blessing that they still can't get the development done, because some of them are pretty powerful, as you know. But it does give a good way for the community to vet the developers. But in the process of attending this, I learned that there was a homeless chair, a very impassioned gentleman by the name of Sean McMillan. And he spoke at these meetings on homelessness and his efforts to address the homeless crises. And they come up in many different forms of problems, from drugs to outright criminal to simply people down on their luck or in terrible health. And he would go out and do this as a one-man band. I thought, wow, this is impressive that he has this level of dedication to be able to have the tenacity and the temerity to go out and do this. It was amazing to me. So I thought, this is somebody I can really partner with. So I approached him after one of the meetings and I said, you know, you need some help. We need to figure out how to make this work, and how to solve this problem. And concurrently, I have a friend who lived in Brentwood, and he said the Palisades has got an idea. So I went to the Palisades and went to the newspaper to find the newspapers and found out about an organization called Pacific Palisades Task Force for Homelessness. And they had a model which made a lot of sense. The model was to hire professional social workers from a social working homelessness foundation, or organization rather, and put them into a defined area within the Palisades. In other words, the Palisades had a lot of problems with homelessness encampments in the valleys and in the mountains. And this was a way for them to be able to help address that, because they often had them causing fires. So it was a double problem, not just the homelessness encampments, but the fact that it caused a couple significant fires in the Palisades. But the beauty of it was we learned that the model worked, and I'm going to talk to you more about that a little bit later. So I went with Sean and I said, you know, let's form a group and let's try to emulate the Palisades. So I'm going to talk about that shortly. And this group that got formed was from some compassionate individuals from our parish. Thomas and I belong to another group of a men's prayer group from St. Paul the Apostle. And I've had tremendous support not only from Thomas, but from this group and from other members of our prayer group. And one of the members said, you know, go to the Palisades and figure this out, because they've been successful, and they have been successful with it. So we developed a mission statement by putting out a request for people to attend a meeting for homelessness. And it went out to the West Side Neighborhood Council list, and we had about a dozen people show up. And about 10 of them decided to stay on and be part of our board. In homelessness, there's people that have compassion for homelessness, but don't know what to do about it. And there's another group that we call NIMBYs. You've probably heard of the NIMBY. It's not in my backyard. And there's some understanding there, and there's also a lack of compassion there. So we decided to come up with like minds with a mission statement. I'll read the mission statement. We seek to increase community participation in addressing the issues in the West Los Angeles area. We fund trained professionals to engage with those experiencing homelessness and connect them to city, county, state, and community private resources. So that's the key about what we were trying to do. Now I want to share with you a little video, if I may. Everybody see it?
Yes. We don't hear any sound though.
Yeah, you want to come back out and check the little box that says share computer sound. It's good to just stop share, get out of it right, and then go back to share screen. And in the lower left, you'll see a little box that says check computer sound.
Ah, thank you.
And then it should work fine.
Oh, there it is.
Engage social workers to work in our area with
That's good.
population. We're doing a clothing drive today to collect items for our social workers to distribute to the community, and also that we will be distributing to the homeless community to so that the community can learn about us, that we're here, and we're just getting started. We're hoping to launch our program in early 2021.
We're focusing on West LA and trying to make sure that we make a difference in our own neighborhood. Other areas of the city get a lot more attention for the homeless than we do. So that's why we want to put our own outreach social workers on the street in West LA to be able to accomplish the goal of making sure they get the same kind of services and find out what's all available in LA County, which is very extensive.
This movement is so needed. I mean, we have had the homeless situation has only gotten worse over the years, not from the pandemic didn't help, but before that. And what we needed, which the city hasn't been able to provide for whatever reason, what we need is a group like this that will go out and talk with the people. So if we can break it down into small groups and work within your own community, I think then we can finally make a little dent into what is going on and do it with kindness and with respect, because they are people that need our respect.
We definitely have support from the community. It's been incredible to do this drive. We just mostly need financial support at this point so that we can get the social workers out into the field working with the population.
So that was a clothing drive that we did in December, and we gathered 90 excuse me. Sorry, a little technical challenge there. Picked up some LASA seminar that just took place. Speaking of LASA, that really relates to the organization that deals with homelessness for LA County. And to take it up a notch further, how big is the homeless problem? In the country, in the US, there's 560,000 homeless people as of 2019, because counts haven't really been done in 2020. In California, that's 151,000. That's 25% of the national total, even though we're just about 10% of the national population. Of course, the weather has a great bearing on that. The LA County, the total, is 66,000 as of 2019, in which I participated in the count. With the pandemic and just the visual appearances and changes of the count, I think it's up at least 20% over that. It has really been a difficult year for the homeless people, those getting into homelessness. The organization that is responsible for addressing the homeless problem in Los Angeles County is called LAHSA, Los Angeles Housing Service Authority. It's a joint organization from the city and county. It's funded by the city, county, state, and federal grants and taxes. If you recall, the county has a 1% sales tax, or 0.5%, I'm not sure which exactly, but that goes to LAHSA. And the funding for LAHSA is $600 million a year. Not a small number. Last year it was $800 million with extra grants from COVID. And with that, they're able to put 207 people per day into housing that take them from being unhoused to housed. That's 207 people a day. That's a lot. The problem is there's 220 people a day that become unhoused. So the number just keeps growing no matter how much success they've had. Now, at the same time, I can say there's a lack of success because they don't really have a lot of outreach social workers. They've got a lot of social workers. They've got about 150 teams that go out, but the teams that they have that go out are basically reactionary. Our whole concept is to be proactive, to be able to identify the names of the people that are homeless on the street. Do you know the names of the homeless people on your block? Do you have any on your block? We're a block away from Pico, so we do have 2 homeless fellows in our block. In fact, within 2 blocks, there's another 3. And we know their names, and we try to provide them some assistance on a personal level when possible. So the amount of contacts they have with LAHSA, it's almost zero, the outreach programs. Now, the way LAHSA is organized is all this money comes in, and then they select providers. So the provider for CD5, which is Council District 5 or SPA 5, is St. Joseph's. And St. Joseph's is located in Venice, and their responsibility is CD5. And they provide the social workers and the social support and the feeding and the housing and all the resources that are possible to be mustered within an area. CD6 is the people concern in Santa Monica, and they do an excellent job. And there's others that are provided throughout the city and throughout the county. So LAHSA divides up their money in contracts with these various providers to solve the problem. The providers work independently as 501c3 nonprofits, funded largely by the government, often based upon the number of days housed of a homeless person in temporary housing, and other forms of grants. It's not what I would consider to be the most effective model, because it does not have the level of outreach that we need. That's why the Palisades model and our concept has been to build a relationship like a neighbor with the homeless people, because they are our neighbors, even though they don't have a house and an address. They are a neighbor, and we try to help them in any way that we can. LAHSA has, just to give you a concept of how big the challenge is, 440 clients or homeless clients per caseworker. Now, how can you deal with 440 people? Ideally, a caseworker has about 50 or less to deal with. In our model for West LA, it's going to be 2 caseworkers for about 200 people. 250. We don't have a current count. So that will be a much better ratio, still not as great as it could be to be the most effective, but it's the same ratio the Palisades used, and they've been effective with doing that, and so effective that they've reduced their homeless count from 174, or from 200 to 74. So I put about 125 people less on the street. Now that doesn't count the many people that have come through the system. This is the net number after a period of 3 years. So we have to be able to do that as well. Now, I'd like to show you our deck, what we're about. And so as of this time, does everybody see the screen?
No.
Sorry. Many times as I do this, I still
It's
find
tricky.
Michael, if you have it on your desktop, then when you, yeah, that's good. Origination, we see that.
Michael, I'm hoping we'll have time for Q&A because I'm sure the group has a lot of questions.
I'm going to wrap it up in about 5 minutes, 10 minutes. We were inspired by Sean McMillan, the West Side Neighborhood Council, group of West Los Angeles citizens gathered to evaluate and work to solve the homeless problem on the West Side. The many issues of the homeless were battered women, mothers with children, foster children who became 18, physically, mentally disabled, injured vets, substance abuse, and chronic homelessness. We observed the success of the Palisades Task Force for Homelessness and recognized that there were significant resources available, but lacking the one-to-one contact with the homeless client to determine what their needs were. Pacific Palisades began with about 200 homeless people, as I mentioned earlier, with endless problems, trash encampments, and wildfires. Currently, the number is 74. 3 years, many more than the 126 replaced and entered housing. So our mission statement is to increase civic engagement in the challenge of homelessness in the West LA area with volunteers from each HOA to assist the caseworkers. Retain caseworkers to engage. Whoops. This is our territory. I read the mission statement earlier. This is our territory on the west side. We're 405 on the west, 10 on the south, Wilshire on the north, and Century City on the east. Club Drive. The city, county, and state and private organizations have a wide variety of resources to meet the needs for the homeless. Now, just a footnote, some of the challenges there is that there might be an organization, a private organization that was set up as a 501c3 that is to deal with alcohol abuse. And the alcohol abuse would be for people from 18 to 29. So the organizations are often very narrow in their focus. So for a caseworker to understand each of the resources of the 300 or so organizations that are out there in LA County, they need to understand each of these unique requirements to be able to place somebody in the right spot. And there's several substance abuse organizations, but they don't all take anybody. They have to fit certain criteria. So that's the challenge. Caseworkers work with the homeless to build trust, connect them with the solution that will return them to the functional housed population. The lack of social outreach is our biggest problem. The plan of West LA Homeless is to contact with an established service provider in order to secure the exclusive services of 2 or 3 caseworkers we permanently assigned to our territory. The dedicated caseworkers will census the area and get to know the clients in the territory. They will identify the clients that are homeless, determine the best solution, and get them entered to a program or housing. West LA Homeless needs volunteers to assist our professional team, write press releases, communicate with the community, assist in our client census, assist at events, serve on our committee. West LA Homeless needs money to pay the service organizations for staffing and support required. The estimated annual cost for 2 social workers and support, including some relocation expenses, are $220,000. We have partners that have already joined us in this process, including the generous contribution from the Mastery Circle, Westside Neighborhood Council, $10,000, Westwood Homeowners Association, $12,500, Westwood South of Santa Monica HOA, $15,000, Councilman Koretz, $10,000, Fox News, $25,000, Chevy Hills HOA, $10,000, community contributions, $12,000, Von Meyer, $10,000, South Bay Partners, $10,000, and we have a dozen more that are in the process of determining what their contribution levels are going to be and when they're going to occur. Now, you might wonder what we're dealing with homelessness. I just want to take a moment before I turn it over to questions, talking about the causes of homelessness. Substance abuse is 28%. HIV/AIDS, 2%. Mental illness, 25%. Physical disability, 19%. Also, we've got developmental disabled people, abused spouses and abused children. Foster children have become 18, and where do they go? They don't have a home anymore. Nobody's going to keep them there. They just end up on the street. And of course, we've got newly released felons, which have been coming in at an increasingly rapid rate. And we have a handful of chronic disabled, are chronically homeless. We have worked with a couple of those people as a committee. We've housed them, and they become unhoused by their own choice. We housed one gentleman by the name of Frank Sinatra. That's right, that's his name. And he was a frequent visitor to St. Paul's Church, and some of the parishioners on our committee were very active in helping him. We got him housed in Chevy Hills in Rancho Park when they brought in the trailers, and we got him a trailer. Well, he didn't last long in the trailer. He was back out on the street panhandling and didn't show up for curfew. So those are kind of the problems that we face. But you have to keep working with all of them. That's our mission, ladies and gentlemen. We need help at all times with volunteerism and with community financial support. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it wasn't too much information at one time.
No, thank you so much, Michael. And we have about 10 minutes for Q&A or interaction. Lisa has her hand up.
Tell her to unmute.
She knows.
So I live blocks away from Echo Park Lake. The facility just recently fenced off from, there must have been at least 150 homeless tents in the area. And what I find is interesting was that there was a certain individual that was going around and interviewing a lot of these people who were living in the park. And of course, the main issue with most of them is the fact that, yes, they are moved into these latchkey or turnkey facilities, but they're only temporary. And it got me kind of thinking about that idea that was happening in the valley on Chandler, those little homes that were built in a parking lot. And to me, that's such a more promising solution. Although a lot of the homeless people, I understand, do not want to be confined. They like the ability to be able to do whatever they want when they want. And like, for example, there was one very old lady who had physical problems. I guess she couldn't walk, so she had a wheelchair, but she had a dog. And she was very worried that if she ended up in one of these hotels, but she wouldn't be able to take her dog. And so I think this homeless problem is just so complex. And some of the problem too is that we don't have any more safety nets in place. They were all taken away, I guess, during the Reagan era, which is so unfortunate that we don't have ways really in place to really support these people. And we're having to pull from so many different areas now in order to support these people. So what's your feeling about that, Michael?
Well, during the 80s, they did change the law. I mean, in the 80s, if somebody was mentally ill, they could be locked down. Today, you can't be locked down. The ACLU battled with it, negotiated with the California legislature, and the California legislature voted 77-1 to eliminate lockdown facilities. So it was unanimous virtually to end lockdown facilities by the California legislature. And of course, they opened the doors. The facilities that were there emptied out. They were nothing but expense and no patients, so they closed them. So as a result of what the government body decided to do, that caused that to occur. What do I feel about it? I think we need them. Yes, Paul?
We live in Long Beach, and I work with the fire department, and we have two what are called heart units that are staffed with paramedics and fully staffed, and they go around to the homeless communities and see what they need. Some of them need medications and so on. So it doesn't take care of the whole problem, but it's an official part of the fire department's job to reach out to them, try to help them, try to get them into housing and take care of them. Heart units go around, and most of them are on the beach, of course, and so they're able to find them and on the LA River and just see how they're doing.
That's excellent. There are tremendous amounts of efforts that are being placed by individuals, and I don't want to be critical of the efforts of LASA because they have made a dent, but they've got a big bureaucracy that they're supporting also. I think it's a problem that could take a little less bureaucracy and a lot more feet on the street, out touching hands with the homeless people and finding out the problem, because each individual has got a unique problem, unique challenge. There's no two alike. See, and you have to build their trust to get to know them, to help them find a solution. They're confused, they're lost. Try sleeping on the street. Try sleeping on the sidewalk in this weather, and see if you're not a little bit crazy after a while.
Yeah.
It'll do that to anybody. It's tragic. It's tragic, and we have so much money in this country that it should never happen.
Michael, I really appreciate you speaking to us. And the problem is so big and growing bigger every day. I personally am ashamed. I live across the street from a little Anglican community church where the pastor has just died a few months ago. And they have a refrigerator outside, and they fill it with food every day. And the homeless come from several blocks around, and I really applaud that. My own housekeeper has told me, watch out, there's been robberies in the neighborhood, don't go over there, don't befriend them. I mean, it evokes fear in people. And what you're advocating, and I'm thinking of BJ and our group and Jim Pike, maybe you could tell them that example because of what they have done with a homeless person in the neighborhood.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Thank you, Thomas. One of our board members' wives, BJ Pike, has reached out to a homeless man that is just off Westwood Boulevard at the train station. And he's in his 60s and had severe head injury, evidently in some accident or some war, and was just basically sleeping on the ground and existing from day to day somehow. And they took him in to the point of bringing him into their home, having him get a shower, get his hair cut, helped him with social services, and spent hours and hours and hours on the phone trying to get through to the agencies that could help him. Have been able to reconnect him with his family, which he was estranged from. Have been able to get him some social services, but requires identification levels that they don't have current driver's licenses or real ID cards. So it's a real challenge to get the services because you have to have your identification all set together. So BJ went to great lengths to get this man serviced, and she spent hours on it every week for I think the last 3 months. Isn't that right, Thomas?
Yes. Yeah.
And to get him in a position where he could live more comfortably, even though he still is not housed. But the amount of work it takes for one person was just really evidenced for us.
Thank you. We have two people who've had their hands raised. If we have just a quick share, we're actually into our time for business. So first Danielle and then Jasmine.
Thank you. I'm a healthcare professional, and I was living in LA, and then I went back to Switzerland, and actually now I'm in Europe, in Malta. But I'm always very interested in helping the homeless. And in LA, I found myself almost on the verge of homelessness myself. And then in Switzerland, I did find myself homeless. And I'm currently now hunkering down in my home country. And I have none of the social problems that would lead to homelessness. And one thing I've observed, at least if I've often stopped and talked to the homeless people on the street and asked them, and I was interested in them. And I realized that maybe sometimes, even if you put them in a house or you put them in a hotel, and even from my own experience, sometimes they don't necessarily know how to make life work. So I was actually wondering, I had been hoping to start maybe a program where I bring in a pharmacist, somebody who knows how to, I mean, a social worker can do so much, but I was actually wondering if you can put together a team of people where you can teach people how to take care of their health, self-care, and also how to administer their life, like the basics of administering life in general. Once they do get a house, how do they keep it? If they do get a job, how do they keep the job? How do they divide up their money? Because you can throw a bunch of money at somebody, give them a house, but if they don't know how to, this was a program I had hoped to maybe see if I can start or something. So my question for you is, what do you think about that? And do you have to be a social worker to actually be working full time with the homeless?
Those are really great questions and concerns, and we're so tight on time.
Okay, it's okay. I just want to throw it out there. It's okay.
Sure. Thank you so much, Michael.
Thank you, Michael. Yes.
Interesting.
Thank you. I sure appreciate the opportunity to speak to your group.